Okay, greetings, brothers and sisters. So I have three audios I'm going to present here going into the Babuji Birthday Gathering. So this will be up tomorrow on Tuesday, April 29th, the start of the gathering. And this also be in the the Journey series probably after the gathering's over. But this is for people who are listening to the Gratefulness meditation. You know, I've had this breakthrough with the thoughtlessness. I've had a number of good sittings over the weekend. The satsang was great, and the Friday night sitting was spectacular. And I've developed just like a deeper level of my experience of the meditation, and so that's going to enhance the preceptor abilities, and also all these other things that go with it in terms of the gratefulness meditation. It's coming at a time where the numbers in my view count and the videos on the channels are dwindling, and less people are doing gratefulness meditation. And there's this epic gathering that I, understand to be a transitional type of transcendent type of situation. And so, like this, I could say from this experience, it happened at a good time. Where I just started to do this thoughtlessness. I don't want to call it thoughtlessness because there are thoughts that come in. It's just a different level of just penetrating to a different level of the experience of the meditation and the system, the consciousness. Like my consciousness level has gone up, which is really a great thing to think about in terms of the success of the Sahaj Marg system and the gratefulness meditation that we're doing. And so I'm really happy about that. I just did an hour-long audio that you're going to hear at the end of this, talking about this in greater detail, not about the consciousness shift as much, but just everything that's going on in the world. But I have these three audios that I've done in previous videos that are going to go here as a part of the playlist of the death and dying playlist and things to know about the Sahaj Marg system. But in terms of the Babuji gathering now, it's Monday, April 28th. Tomorrow it starts. Tuesday, April 29th, 2025. This is there'll be two sittings every day, the 29th, the 30th, and the May 1st. And so it'll be a total of 6 group meditations. People can meditate on their own. There'll be updates and things on the Gratefulness Meditation channel as we go through this, and I'll talk about my experiences and whatever, like little information and things. But it's 2 sittings per day. You meditate, not more than an hour, usually between 40 minutes, 45 minutes, and an hour, depending on whatever the length of the sitting. You'd feel transmission at the beginning. You might go through cleaning, intense cleaning. There might be things that go on in terms of restlessness and illness and things that cause some discomfort at the beginning, before the gathering. And then the sittings get more and more refined, and your experience does as you get cleaned out. And then there's a more uplifting energy at the end, hopefully people experience. And that's or whatever noting down, like any kind of change in your consciousness. So a lot of times it's subtle changes, but you feel different and better. And so, it's up to each person to have their own experience. It's, I'm not trying to, say what's going to happen for you. It's just what, it's just that's how the work goes. Like there's intense cleaning in the beginning and more, bliss at the end. And it's a little boost to one's spiritual practice. All right. So I have these other audios. The one I did today, I'll put at the end. These other audios that I did, I can't remember what they're in, but I would already had opened them up to be in a standalone video. It has to do with all these things I've been talking about with the Preparing for Death playlist and this condition and, now the gathering. And so here they are. Here, without further ado, here are the audios. Okay, greetings, brothers and sisters. So this is, to me, going to be a very profound message that, passed through me through meditation this morning. I've been fighting a headache. I don't want to say fighting because you can't fight a headache. A migraine. I talked about this a little bit in my other videos. I started having a migraine around Tuesday. There's an upcoming spiritual gathering, and there's often cleaning I mean, there's always cleaning that goes before these gatherings, and they often come in discomfort and illnesses and aggravation and, either emotional, like you go through emotional crises or you have physical crisis. In this case, there's a headache, right? I've been having less and less migraines over the years, and they've been less in severity, so much so that I can usually work through them and have a fairly functional day. But this one, I got on Tuesday, felt better on Wednesday. Then Wednesday night, it kind of sort of coming back. It was on one side of the base of my skull, but it's also the nausea and the lack of serotonin that really is the killer. The pain isn't so bad anymore for me. It's just it's like, I don't want to even call it depression. It's a lack of, just any kind of positive feeling or energy, happiness. And then last night, it's yesterday, Friday, it went away and had incredible meditation. We have these 9 p.m. meditations. And then I woke up in the middle of the night, Friday night, Saturday morning, and my headache was coming back. Like I had the headache again. I somehow was sleeping. It came back, which is fucked because usually sleep used to, I used to be able to, reset and sleep, but now it's the opposite was happening. And then I woke up and meditated again. Just had a good meditation, and the headache sort of subsided and went away, which was good. And I feel fairly positive today. It's still maybe lingering there, so we'll see, but that's neither here nor there. But I had this profound meditation this morning about like something I've never talked about in this way and in this depth or never thought about personally. And it's something that everybody should know. So people say to some people, oh, you don't have a soul. You're soulless, right? This is something where people will think of somebody as completely evil and say they're soulless. But you can't exist without a soul, right? Your body is temporary. People often say, oh, you have such a great soul, or this person has soul, or whatever. But soul is mandatory. Your body is not. Your body's temporary. Like there's a saying that you are a soul and you have a body. Like there's some bumper sticker new age thing, but it's a true statement. You have a soul, you are a soul. You are a soul and you have a body temporarily. And so your soul, if there is a such thing as a soul, which for me I've had overwhelming experience and evidence of a soul. And so for me it's a no-brainer. So if there is a soul, and each person has to figure that out for themselves, because something's an idea until you know it, right? Like you either know you have a soul or you don't. Like you might think you have one, you might hope you have one, whatever. You might hope you are one because that's what it is. But, most people don't think about it all that much. They don't do anything in terms of pursuing a relationship with the soul and understanding the nature of having a soul. What does having a soul mean, right? Because what having a soul means is your body is a temporary situation, and your body is an illusion of what you really are. Your body is a grosser form. So when I talk about, to understand this, people, what I'm going to talk about here is in the Sahaj Marg system, God is the most subtle. So love energy is the most subtle thing in the world, in the universe. Everything else is a grosser form of love, of God. So God is the fundamental building block. When you feel love energy, that's God. And that's the most subtle thing. So I talk about this quite often in many different videos, Journey Series 1s, other places, where you can go without food for 40 days, something, whatever it is. There's some period of time you can go without food, and then you die. But it's many days. Water, 3-4 days. Air, 10, 15 minutes, no matter what the record is, right? And food is grosser than water. Water is grosser than air. And air is grosser than love. And without love, you can't exist. So that some place in your etheric body, your physical body, there's God's love. And that's the soul. Also the soul energy, which is the most subtle. And that's you in your purest, refined state. And then you have these other subtle bodies. This is something from ancient yogic understanding, and this is, every religion should teach this, the stuff about the subtle bodies, right? So I looked this up on one of these, the Gemini thing. And in the yogic and Vedantic philosophy, subtle bodies are non-physical aspect of a person, including consciousness, chit, the mind Manus, the intellect Buddha, and the ego Ankar, which function with a vibrational field. These subtle bodies are part of the subtle body. There's also other subtle bodies as well, and spiritual points and things in this system, but that's the basic ones. Also known as the astral or mental body, alongside with the physical body and the causal body. The causal body is the innermost body, veiling the Atman, or the true self. The subtle body evolves through spiritual practice, purifying and simplifying itself, and is connected to the soul. And that's a great even for an AI, this AI bot, like an AI bot, which doesn't have a soul and doesn't have subtle bodies, like to be able to comb together that explanation. It's a great explanation, better than the one that I would have said from memory. And that's the danger of AI, because it's become so much easier than calling things up and remembering things. But anyways, it's a good explanation. But you have these subtle bodies, right, that manifest into, and these subtle bodies are grosser than the Atman, the soul, the causal body. The causal body is the covering of the soul that manifests into your physical body. And so it's the soul inside of you. And then you have these other layers of consciousness, right? These various layers of consciousness that are part of that, right? The ego Ankar, the intellect Buddha, the chit consciousness, and the mind Manus. These are all fields of energy that create your mind, your psychological makeup, your who you are as a person, your identity, these things. And those things are more subtle than your physical body, but they reside in your physical body. And without a physical body, these things only exist in sort of potential when you're just a soul. These things are, potential within a soul that then manifests into a body. But then you come into your body, right? You are born into this body, and you are unaware, at least, when you're a baby, maybe there's some awareness. But this is different. You have to penetrate to a much more subtle level. There's grosser and subtle, right? God is subtle. And then there's grosser forms of existence, manifestation of the divinity in a grosser form. Something that is, I don't want to say it's not perverted, but it's a perversion. It is a knockoff, or some grosser level of your pure state of who you are as a spiritual being, right? So this is kind of the introduction, and I'm going to get to something that I haven't talked about. This is, this profound information that came to me about, body and body consciousness. And so, a little bit more of the introduction. So you come into your physical body, and you now have senses, and it kind of blows your soul away, because your soul doesn't have the ability to see. It doesn't have eyes. It doesn't have, in terms of visual perception, and there isn't really anything to see if you're in an etheric world. Like things, there's no materiality there. And so now you see things, and you experience existence in a physical form. And you have colors and smells, and you can hear things, and you have this beautiful world here that's got so much abundance of sensory stimulation, right? And then you have physical needs, like you're hungry, and you have to eat, and you have to breathe, and you have to have comfort, warmth, or whatever it is, right? It gets too cold, it gets too hot. Like your body now has this thing, the survival mechanism. You have to survive, and there are things you need to survive, and these things are, many of them are pleasurable. And then you have to reproduce. And, the sexual component of a physical being, I've talked about this in the past. So what you have is an overwhelmingly strong sexual urge, because in the divine system, there's the proliferation of life. There has to be more and more life, right? This is, be fruitful and multiply in the biblical way of explaining it. But there has to be more. You have to have continuation of life, right? There needs to be, there's also soul energy. That people don't understand that, especially around women who are, going to get pregnant soon. The soul comes to the woman, the baby soul. This is why women get so depressed when they have miscarriages and abortions and things like this. The soul of the baby circulates around and is present with the mother, so it can manifest its body. And so you have this soul that wants to be born. And so you have divine forces that are pushing you towards reproduction. And then you have this overwhelmingly strong biological need to to reproduce, right? And, within nature, you'll see this with animals, especially, if you're living in a country area. Like we see coyotes only when there's mating season. You'll see animals like there's toads everywhere. We had these toads. I showed a video of these toads in our pond. And they, it was like my wife was calling it a pool party, right? There was just all these toads, making this noise. It was like it just had rained. And we'd never seen this before. And this was a big year for toads. And whether we've been traveling or we didn't go out on this specific day, it's like a one-day event, a big event. And now I have a bunch of videos. I'm going to do an update. There's all these little tadpoles that are baby toads that are, going to, manifest their existence, right? Proliferate the toad population. And so the toads, which are, a lot of these animals are very secret. You never see them. But the one time you will see them is in mating season, right? Because of the strong urge to mate, they risk their lives, to mate and put themselves in jeopardy. We have these big egrets that come into our ponds and, other creatures, whatever, raccoons, whatever it might be. And these animals are hiding, most of the year, but they come out because they have to mate. And they, make themselves known. They let everybody know where they are by making some sort of a sound. You have these colorful birds that'll flash their, we have these red-winged blackbirds that flash their red-spotted wings and make a loud sound, make this sound. And then we have mourning doves that are out there making sounds, letting, the opposite sex knows they're available. And they put themselves at great risk of predators that can now hear them and see them when they normally would be hidden, right? Because that's the power of the sexual, the sexual urge and the, that's hardwired into biological creatures, right? So you see this. You see the way that reproduction is, this driving force between the proliferation of life. And you see how much people get in trouble because of this. I'm going to cover Shannon Sharp a little bit, like I said in this video, some other things. This video will be up on Monday, April 27th. So it'll be, for those of you listening to this on the Journey series, I'll also put this audio there. There's things that are going to go with this that I'll tell you, these, this Pete Hegseth and these other people. But you see that there has been an understanding of the power of the sexual drive, the sexual urges, and also the pleasure behind sexuality. And we see, with, of course, the porn industry, that makes up 1/3 of the internet, but all the way sex is used and marketed and used on various levels to manipulate people, because people will do stupid shit because they've been hardwired, just like animals are, to take risky behaviors and only think of reproduction, right? And so these are physical things that are hardwired into your body, urge for food, and, like when you're really hungry and when you're really thirsty, and, the survival mechanism, and these things that are hardwired into the physical body. And then just all the stimulation that's there, the pleasurable sights and sounds, and, all these things that your soul gets hooked into and loses its sense of itself, its true nature, because the physical life is overwhelming with abundance and stimulation. And now, of course, with the internet, there's a whole nother level of, in the real world versus the cyber world, which cyber world is so entrancing. And, there's just now another layer of this where you're pulled away from your true purpose and your true nature, right? And this is the part that's going to be new. So, about 2 years ago, I just tried, because I've been meditating now for years. And thoughtlessness is not a part of a goal of the Sahaj Marg meditation. But you learn to become, thoughtless. You can just not think about anything. And, I've had experiences of that I haven't, they weren't things that I did purposely. I just went into a thoughtlessness state. There's a state of samadhi. There's various states where you just withdraw from the world and your mind is blank and you're just feeling, on a different level of consciousness. And so, I just purposely tried, which I hadn't done before, to just not have any thoughts. There's a point, one of the hard points you can meditate to create a thoughtless state, but I wasn't doing that, where I just was like, I'm just not going to think about anything, which I was able to do quite easily because I've been meditating on this system, again, which isn't about that sort of thing. It's not about being thoughtless, but it's a condition or it's an ability you get after a while, and I just had it. And it was just nice not to think about anything. And I could sit there for minutes, a thought would pop in here or there, but, it wasn't, it just like something passing in front of me, like I wasn't even aware of it, like I wasn't paying attention to it. I wasn't thinking of, like you have a thought and then you think more things about that, right? You let your mind, go in that direction. And I was just able to sit there, and then I didn't think about it. Then, and I was, I don't know, there was a series of things that happened. Somebody posted a comment about how that you want to be in a thoughtless state at the time of death. It was one of the teachings from these people who are hearing about Sahaj Marg from me are reading the books and then posting quotes and being aware of these things themselves, right? And so there was that. And so I started to work on this thoughtlessness state, and it was a different state of consciousness. And it was what I was doing when I meditated this morning. I've been working on this for over a couple weeks now in my meditations and things, and my meditations got so much better. And what I've realized about it is it's not really about being thoughtless. It's penetrating to a different level of consciousness where you become unaware of your body, which is one of the sort of goals of the Sahaj Marg system during meditation, that you forget about your body. And when you forget about your body, you forget about all the things to do with your body. All your bodily needs, your body's discomfort, any of these things, like any of the sensory kind of things that are there to let you know something's hot, something's cold, there's something crawling on you. There's a fire. You can smell smoke. These things, like all the things like they have to do with your body. Like you're asleep, but you're not asleep. Like you're not thinking about your body at all. You're now just in the state of your soul. So you're in this etheric world, which is, again, not so much of a goal as Sahaj Marg, but something that's a necessary experience and something where you're penetrating to a different level, and that there can be a pure exchange of information without words. It's more of a feeling type of thing, and just like knowing things without them being like tangible, like them being physical reality thoughts. Concrete thoughts with words, concrete thoughts with ideas, but just sensing things and understanding them in seed form, and then they can, you can translate them into words, or you can translate them into the manifestation of a plan and an action or something, right? Where you get things in, an idea, less than an idea, then they turn into, some sort of, where you're thinking about them, like on a level of your mind is, okay, these words that I'm saying to you now, right? It comes in a seed form, in a subtle form, and then it can be, translated into something where you can talk about it, but it's coming from a, more of a telepathy type situation, right? Souls communicate with each other through telepathy. There's no language, and they just know things, and they, there's information exchanged on a different kind of level, and being able to penetrate to that level, going inward and going to a more subtle level of thought and consciousness, right? So here's the thing that, came to me through this process this morning. So I'm coming out of this, right? And I realized, there's just a detachment from my physical body, more of a, as you get older, your physical body, needs to seem more of an illusion in itself, or something that, you're not, you don't just identify with who you are as a physical being. You look in the mirror and you go, yeah, that's me. You look in the mirror, other people look at you, you look a certain way, your voice sounds a certain way, and then you have these tendencies, your preferences, things you like, your favorite, breakfast, or your favorite things, and your, what you like to spend your time on, and the kind of, personality you have based in your physical body, right? Things that have to do with your physical, the physical nature of your existence. But as you now, it's like I'm going to be 61 this summer. I turned 60, which is, kind of mind blowing to me because I don't know what even that means, right? But, I'm in the back end of my life, right? I'm the back third of my life. And death is just more prevalent, not just because of any physical issues that I have, but just, it's just, that's how things, go inside your system. Like you're just being prepared. If you're aware, you're not in denial of your circumstance. You're not, in some fear of death way that you're not denying the inevitable end of your life, then you start to move towards that on a level that, you're much more mature. Your life is, your kids are grown, and you have these various things you had to accomplish, and your career is coming to an end, and, your physical life is dissipating. And so you now start being prepared for the journey. It's not a real journey, but it's a, transition from your physical body to back to being a soul again, right? So you're being prepared for, the end of something, like something's ending. Like you began as a baby, and now you're going to end. Your life is ending in the near future. Maybe not the near future, but you're much closer to it than you were before. So I had to take a little break and go outside. It's it's interesting that I'm doing this on such a great time of the year, the spring here, and I just I'm doing updates on our mushrooms, all these things. Probably in our next video, I have all these videos clips to put together. Like I said, we have tadpoles now, and there's all these things. And so I just let the chickens out. I had them in this peck and play, and now I just let them out where they're getting their first chance to free range outside. And it was a whole process I went through this morning. And spring is such a time for the proliferation of life. The birds are chirping, the frogs are croaking, and the animals are making noise. The trees are flowering out. This is all creation. This is all procreation. Like, this is the proliferation of the species. The seeds are dropping, and love is in the air, all that stuff, right? Spring is the time of creation. I was outside. It was cold out. It's been warm. It's been the 70s the last so many days, and it was freezing this morning. It rained. That's probably the barometric pressure probably dropped, which often can give me a chance of a headache. But I looked at the weather, and it said it's 48 outside, but it feels like 37. There's a cold wind. Well, then it started to warm up. The sun came out, and I'm letting the chickens out. So it's just a beautiful spring day. But what I was going to say here is that, this idea that the stuff that I've been, meditating on, and, whatever this particular phase of my spiritual journey, there's this being aware of, like, my body, like almost being an illusion at times, like feeling disconnected from my body. And, in the psychological world, in the counseling world, the DSM-5, this can be considered disassociation or dysphoria, these number of diagnoses, because the problem with mainstream psychology is it's based in the physical mind, it's based in the physical reality. That's a problem with science, because science can't prove a soul. Science can't prove a God. Divine energy can't prove any sort of etheric life. There's no instrument in science to measure such things. And so when science goes strictly into the physical reality, the physical aspect of material existence, which is illusionary at its base, it's an illusion of what's, the real thing, which is etheric. Just like I talk about how you're looking at this video, and it appears to be images, and you're hearing what sounds like my voice, but it's a copy. It's a digital copy, right? I'm talking now, it's Saturday, April 26, 11:56 in the morning. And, not to be cryptic, but I could be dead by the time you're listening to this, right? And so it sounds like you're listening to me talk to you, in real time. But I've recorded this 2 days before you're going to listen to it. This is going out on Monday. So whenever you happen to listen to this, it's, days have passed. But it sounds like it's a living, live, whatever it is, right? So these ideas of things going into the digital format, these code, the computer code, the computer languages, those are what's really what you're looking at. And it's manifesting into images and sounds and things, right? And so that's a metaphor for the soul, and science can't even understand that. Most scientists, are atheistic in this regard, because they can't, their science, they can't prove the subtle nature and the subtle bodies and the etheric nature of things. So the psychological world, when somebody disconnects from their body and these things, and it often can be a psychological condition. I'm not saying it's 100% spiritual, because it's not. Oftentimes crazy people can channel. They can, at times, they'll rise up to a higher level of consciousness. Crazy people are often, madness. One of the first courses when I got my master's degree in counseling, which I really found to be, a great class, was creativity and madness. And it talked about how so many creative geniuses are often considered crazy. Artists and musicians and all these people. And we were tasked to find somebody. And I didn't know what to do. And it was a time where I was going through the introduction to a difficult marriage, and 2 kids being born in the first 2 years of the marriage, and then going to graduate school, and I was just overwhelmed, and I didn't know what to do. And I had a friend who did the meditation, a scientist who was a chess player, and said, "You got to do Bobby Fischer." And so I didn't end up doing my presentation last, and it was a good presentation for something that I really didn't want to do. But all the presentations showed that these people who were considered creative geniuses are often crazy, right? And even Babuji himself, the second master of the Sahaj Marg system, said he was mad for divinity. Like, he went quite mad for it. So there's a fine line between madness and genius, right? And there's a great TED talk by this woman, Elizabeth something or other. She was the person who wrote Eat, Pray, Love. She also wrote a good book about this guy. There's a guy who's got this, Facebook page called Turtle Reserve, and he was on that show Mountain Man. I can't forget what his name is. Doesn't matter. You could look it up. But I read that book, and it was well written. She was a good writer. But she talked about how all these people channel, right? All these people who have creative geniuses. A genius was this disembodied soul. That's what a genius used to be called, right? When they had this idea of a genie. But a genius was some disembodied muse that would channel and help you with your creative process, right? She talked about this one woman who used to, like, the poems. She was a poet, and the poems used to, like, go by her. Like, she would have this sensation of, like, this idea of the poem. The words of the poem would, like, fly by her. And one time she didn't catch it, and she had to run and grab it. And then when she wrote the poem, it was backwards. I mean, it's quite interesting to listen to. I mean, you could, some of it might be bullshit, but whatever, like everything could be. But this idea of channeling and this idea of connecting to the etheric world, and, the madness that goes with that, because you start to see the material world as an illusion, which creates lots of problems. But you think about people like Kanye West, and, one of the musical artists, I have like 3 or 4 songs of hers, is Selena Gomez. And I don't know her from movies and TV shows, but my kids played some of her songs, and my wife and I, there's, I think, 3 songs of hers we listen to when we go traveling. I have this playlist, and it came out that she was bipolar, because I don't like pop music, right? And so all these artists that are produce really good quality content oftentimes are teetering on being crazy. And so in the mainstream psychological way of looking at things, if you were seeing your body as you're disassociating from it, there's a sense that your mind is breaking down or something like this, right? But it's also, and that could be true. Like, there's our people who have personality disorders, and they have, identity disorder, these kind of things, where there's a break from reality. But also can be a spiritual component. There's that great scene from the movie The Grand Canyon, where this older woman is considering, somebody leaves like a baby on her doorstep, and she doesn't know whether to keep the baby. And she's out jogging, and this crazy, gross-looking homeless guy walks by her, and he's talking to himself, violently, like, fuck you, guys, this kind of stuff. And then he goes, "Keep the baby." He just says it, and she turns around and looks at him, because it's just some, random arbitrary thing. But, she's stressing about whether she should keep the baby because she's older. She wants to keep it, but, it's a big thing to take on, this kind of thing. And so channeling and connecting to the etheric world is something that's reality-based. It's more reality-based because your soul's eternal, and it's the real thing. And so, this material world is illusionary on every level. Like the sky isn't blue. The color is whatever it is, the green leaf rejecting green and reflecting it back out, absorbing all the other colors of the prism, the spectrum, the prismatic spectrum, and then reflecting green back out, right? Charji, the third master Sahaj Marg system, said in meditation, early on, he had this experience where his like ankles were where his head and shoulders were. It was like he was standing on his shoulders, and he was seeing the world from that perspective, like he was above his body. And then he said, towards the end, he was dying, and he'd wake up, and he said, it takes me a few minutes. Like he looked in the mirror, and he didn't know who he was. Like he was he was going into this deep state, when he was this, meditative state, because he was towards the end of his life. He had a couple different kinds of cancers, and his body was breaking down completely. He was having all these experiences of being, not who he was, like not in his body, like he was like looking at a stranger. And people have experienced this, where you look in the mirror and you're like, who the fuck is that, right? It's like this moment where it's just, the person that you know to be yourself, and then all of a sudden in a moment you're like, I don't know who you are. Like, like there's like you're almost looking at a stranger, right? This other thing is I took this New Age class with some channeling lady, and she, she had some character issues, and she was, she had her own mental issues, but she was, good at channeling. She had some real stuff. A number of people ended up doing the Sahaj Marg meditation in the area that I lived in. They had also gone through her classes. And one of her, she had like, 10 classes. My ex-girlfriend had found this thing through her therapist or counselor, who I ended up going to, and she learned to channel through this woman. So there was this thing, right? And I'm always doubtful and pessimistic, but also hopeful, and, I'll give things this might be true. Like I'm not, I don't buy into things easily, but I don't reject them easy either. There could be some truth to things. And so I took the class, and it was very interesting. And there was one of the sessions was, whoever was in the class, and there was about 15, 20 people. And you matched up in pairs, and you switched, over time. And you would stare at each other in a, and it's something that usually would make me very uncomfortable. But like, when you're looking at that magic eye, one of those holograms, and there's a hidden picture in it, and you let your eyes relax, and then you can see the picture. You're supposed to do something like that, and you're looking at the person, and their face changes. And if you've had a past life with a person, you're supposed to see them, who they were to you in a past life. Or if you've had multiple past lives, you might see, a few different people. And the people that I connected most with in the class, and my ex-girlfriend, it was successful. The other people, there was nothing, right? And so that's why I thought it was definitely, there was something to it, because it only worked with the people that, that I felt some connection to. Like even if I didn't talk to them, there were some people that were more like NPCs, and other people who I felt like there was some sort of maybe, something there. And so it was very interesting to see that, in just like a way that you would, it definitely, there was something, but it's very subtle. It wasn't like something that was concrete or any of these other things. But in all that, you have to balance out knowledge of spirituality with your material duties in your life. You're supposed to live your life, and that's one of the unique things about Sahaj Marg, where you're supposed to have a job and a family. There's no job where you're a spiritual guru. That's not a paid position. There's no monetary exchange in the Sahaj Marg system. All the masters of the system had jobs and families and kids and things. You can't run away from life like, so many other spiritual and religious traditions have their hierarchy do, right? For a variety of reasons that involves, land ownership and politics and all kinds of things. Taking a vow of celibacy, and you have to live a life. You have a body, and you have to acknowledge your body, but you also have a soul, and you have to acknowledge a soul, and which most people just never do. And so, it's a balance of things. But, at the end of it, you were supposed to understand that the body is illusionary, and there has to be some sort of, moving away from it, right? When I first started making videos, I was on a different sort of a level. I was going through a divorce, and the Sahaj Marg system was going through a transition to, this new master Daji. And this is when my, videos started to pop, and this channel started to take off. And, I used to cover more mundane things in Hollywood. And, I had to, and I felt it was beneath me, it was something like I didn't care about and whatever. But I knew that I had to do it. God let me know, that this was something I had to do to connect with people and to grow the channel and do this as a job. And like with jobs, there are things you don't like, and you just, you do your best to end up liking them. Like, all right, I have to do this, and this is what I'm talking about, being grateful. And, you can't really fake it, so you have to get into things. Like, I have to get into things I don't care about. Politics, celebrity culture, news, and I care less and less about it as, I enter into this sort of phase. And, when I first started making videos, I was on a much more grosser material level, going through my own crises and stressors. And, I was learning about things, too, that I didn't know, and truther theories, which I found interesting. So, my videos appealed to many more people. And, of course, YouTube was different then and all those types of things. But now as I've gone farther along in my spiritual, journey, and then all the other things have gone with it, it gets harder and harder for me to jump back into things that are less and less important. The Hollywood culture was a lot more important before the Apocalaughs started to really unfold like it's doing now. And so, when somebody has a spiritual life and they start talking to people, when they're just in the initial stages of their spiritual awakening, they have a bigger audience. They have a bigger set of disciples. They have a bigger, and that's not what I'm claiming to do here, because I'm not that. But just in general, in terms of what I do here, in terms of producing content. But the higher you go, the more the stranger you sound to people, because people can look up a rung on the ladder. That's why Jesus and some of these other people who had spiritual revelations, but they weren't significant enough that they were so far beyond people that they couldn't get them, right? And so, in the more remedial teachings, the lesser than teachings of Jesus are the ones, and the ones that have been manufactured by the Christian tradition are the ones that appeal to the masses. The ones about strength and power, the ones about, how to make your life better, and promises of this and that, and fear, and, brimstone and shit in the Old Testament. Those are the things that people are able to gravitate to, because their consciousness level just isn't moving in a direction where they can understand his higher level teachings. And I'll say it over and over again, that divinity's within you, and that's just such a remedial statement. But for Americans, it's new for us. There's people that grow up with that concept all around the world. Maybe they don't do anything with it, but at least they understand it and are aware of it and believe in it, right? But, with Americans, that's just not the case. And so if I have to say it over and over again, especially in this materialistic world, things have to be repeated, especially when they're so foreign to people, I'm willing to do that, like just to, provide a service for people. But, on a higher level, this is all just some big fucking illusion. And as you, move forward with your life and you move forward with the spiritual journey, it just becomes apparent that it's so. And, that's what I was alluding to here. This idea that, this body consciousness and everything's about your body and your identity and what people see when they look at you. When you look a certain way. People think I'm mad, and, people are sometimes intimidated. I'm off-putting. And some of that's because it's true. I'm not wanting to connect with people. But, I've been never happier. Like, I just don't smile. Like, I don't smile like other people do. Like, a lot of times I'm feeling happy as, really happy. That feeling of happiness. It's a feeling. Like, it's a, this is especially the day after a migraine where but I'm producing more serotonin in the last 3 or 4 years. And I'm generally happy every day. I enjoy what I'm doing here. I enjoy the farm work. I enjoy my time with my wife, all these things. Like, everything is, it's a happier time in my life. And yet, if you looked at me, you would never notice. You wouldn't see it, right? Like, I have to express it verbally or something for people to even see. And even that is hard for them to believe, because it's just not how I look, right? And so, people see you as a certain way, through their own prejudice, their own lenses, their own, issues with their, men in their life, if you're a man, or women in their life, if you're a woman. Like, everyone has their lens. But then you just project things and people see it on a physical level, right? The book, the judging a book by its cover type of thing. And then they reflect that stuff back to you, and you start believing yourself to be that person that they see, especially when you're in relationships with people, with your significant others that see you a certain way. And they pull things out of you, like they pull things out that they need from you as a husband, or as a wife, or as a mother, or as a father, or, a brother and sister, as an employee or a boss. Like, people will, project things on you and then try to pull those things out of you for their own personal needs, right? And all that shit is, even if those things exist inside of you, or you play those roles for people, it's all just, I mean, in terms of, we talk about being scripted and life is it's hard for me to differentiate between what the controllers are scripting and what's just, the divine drama, which is also scripted, because it all seems like it's just contrived and it's not, it's like there's some kind of thing here that it isn't happening, organically or in some way randomly. Like there's this plan and there's this unfolding of some divine drama or the man-made manipulated drama by the so-called controllers, the people, what people call the elite, and then the manipulated movies and TV shows, but then the flow of energy and information that happens from a divine level of creative consciousness that is manifesting and unfolding in front of us. And so let me just end there because I got to go do shit, and then I'll come back and finish this video. Okay, so for those of you listening to this on the Journey series and a separate video on the Gratefulness meditation. So I was talking about how if you're not progressing, you're regressing. If you're not getting better, you're getting worse, right? And on the spiritual field, this is very clear. There's no stagnant position. You're either going up or you're going down. And, there's these spiritual points that are, if you're on your spiritual journey and you're going through these spiritual points, there are some that are completely blissful, like very like pleasurable and just content, and you just feel great. And there's various stages along the journey where you think you're like in heaven, like you're just you feel great all the time, and it's just you don't want to leave this condition, this state of being. But if you stay there too long, it goes south on you. And then you start regressing because it just works out that way. So you have to be moving forward, right? And so I want to talk about, I was talking about this stuff with this guy Shannon Sharp, and he's accused of rape. And there's a young woman and a lawyer who sued other big celebrities, especially black celebrities, and has tried to shake them down for money. And he's saying it's a shakedown. And, both things could be true. There could be sexual abuse there. And, she was using him for his fame and his like whatever, his money, whatever it is. And he was using her for, for sex and whatever else he was getting out of the relationship. And you have these, basically these prostituted relationships, right? And this is, going back to what I was saying in the beginning of the last voiceover, where I was saying, you're not your body, right? When you look at yourself as your body, you look at yourself as who you are in the physical reality, and that's it, and that's, all you are. Like this is it. It's a one-off. There's a lack of depth in your understanding about life and who you are as a being and what you could eventually become. There's a little bit of prostitution in every job in which involves money. Money in itself is something that makes prostitutes out of everybody, as well as power, politics, and these things. People are constantly prostituting themselves. As an athlete, you're selling your body as a whatever it is, right? You don't have control of your own body. You got to get as many MRIs or physical examinations before you're traded. They got to examine your body to see if it's up to the task, and these things. And there's various ways where people are selling their bodies in one way or another. You sell your labor, you sell your energy, you sell your love, you sell prostitutes that are real prostitutes that are selling their sexuality for it could be any form of prostitution. These fans only or OnlyFans things, and whatever, that's a form of prostitution, right? And in a way I don't judge or have a problem with it, because it's something that our system just makes people do, and you have to make money some way, right? There has to do something. But the issue here isn't your body to sell, like your ego's body to sell. Your soul has created this body for a purpose, and it isn't your body to wreck or pollute, and to toxify. Once you start eating shitty foods and taking in toxic materials, your body starts to act in a way, your moods change, your brain functions more poorly, your liver is no longer capable of getting rid of the toxins, these pharmaceutical medications and their side effects, and drugs and all these things that people take, and all the poison that people put in their bodies. Earlier in this video where the guy said, I was talking about that thing with Kawhi Leonard and saying kids shouldn't drink this shit, meaning Gatorade, and the guy said, yeah, that stuff is horrible, and then parentheses, I drink it anyway. So people knowing they're eating shitty foods and doing it anyhow, and using their body, abusing their body in ways that your body is here for a purpose. You have a soul's path, and you're supposed to get something out of this life. And if you get sidetracked in overindulging in pleasure or whatever it is, convenience, and you use up your creative energy, your sexual energy, or your prana, these types of things, indulging in things that aren't a part of that purpose, you're going against your soul's purpose and your plan here, your soul's plan and your spiritual journey, which everybody does to a certain extent. But I want to get into this part about things like rape and murder, and any kind of abuse, sexual abuse, the abuse of children, the loss of a child, being born crippled, being born without the use of your limbs, getting paralyzed, any number of really bad things that happen to people. When you think about these, you list like the worst possible things that could happen to you, and things done by other people, and things that people say, how can there be a God? People who suffer through a war. Eventually America will have a war in our soil, and we'll suffer a war. Like we'll suffer, bombs going off in our neighborhoods and foreign soldiers invading our country. It's inevitable that'll happen in America, right? But other countries who suffered these kind of things, and the soldiers taking liberties with the people, the civilians, and things like this. I mean, there's been a long history of soldiers coming in and raping and pillaging and taking things and abusing people and burning things down and just shooting civilians for fun and doing whatever it is, right? And you think about those things and you're like, especially innocent children, young children, like how do they deserve that, right? How do they deserve such horrible type of behavior or type of consequences, things like this, that innocent children getting bad things done to them. And when people say, there's God's has a plan and everything happens for a reason, then you're like, well, God's an asshole. Like, why does God do these things to people? But I've said before, there's this samskaric explanation that when you've had past lives, and also your lives as an animal, like if this is your first life, and there's people who are very animalistic, they might be, nice and simple. They might not be evil or something, but they have animalistic tendencies because before this life, they were in the animal kingdom in some capacity. And, the animal kingdom, it's a very violent kingdom. Like the animals, if you observe farm animals or just, we have a hummingbird feeder. And last year, I have a video of it somewhere. There's these 3 hummingbirds, and they're each taking turn. They're one hummingbird. They're trying to keep each other away from the hummingbird feeder. And there's plenty of fucking whatever it is there that we put in there, this nectar, nectar substitute. And they, they're not even eating, but they won't let other hummingbirds eat from it, right? And, this kind of territorial battle, the pecking order, you see it with farm animals. And then often the act of reproduction is some kind of violent rape for many of these animals. There's nothing, nice about it. There's no courtship. It's just, an act of aggression, which is a necessary act of aggression for the proliferation of the species. And so people who are coming in from an animalistic, and in the human condition, this was also how it used to be. Men were brutes in various phases or places around the world, time periods. Brutish men, savage men who are, women are also like this, to whatever extent. And it's, very much a violent pecking order and these kind of things, right? So this has been a part of the human condition for a very long time. And so then there's this idea of samskaras that goes with this, things from a past life where you're carrying something over and you've done something in past lives, and those things then in turn are done to you in one way or another. You're a part of some kind of, negative behaviors, and when you engage in these behaviors, then you're like in this level, this brute level of existence, And so, these are explanations for why things are happening even to kids. If everything's accounted for and there's a divine plan and there's past lives and future lives, then whatever's happening to you is a result of your past behavior and your past, whatever your soul needs you to go through. And, I've talked about some scars, before, right? But let's talk about loss of a child for a moment. This second master of Sahaj Marg system, Babuji, lost two sons. And one of them was to suicide. I'm not sure what the other, they might have both been suicide, but, this is in India, too, in ancient India, which was probably something that wasn't, that common. Suicide wasn't that common in the 1940s, 1920s in rural India. But his first sons died, and it affected him in a, more traditional way. But his second son died, and he was, at that point, he had risen to a high level of spirituality where he's intercommuning with higher developed souls. And he saw his son's soul walking around, and he didn't even realize his son was dead, right? And so he said, the second son, when the second child he lost, it was like the level of like if you lost a pet, like a parrot or something. It was sad, but it didn't affect him nearly as much as the first time, right? And so, on a higher level of spirituality, there's no separation and end to these things because, your loved ones, your deepest, the people you love the most, you're going to connect with them on a soul level here or some other plane of existence in the future. Like your relationship with them isn't over. Many of the people in your life you've had multiple past lives with, future lives with, lives outside of the planet Earth, outside of a physical body. You're intercommuning, they're part of your soul family, whatever it is. And so there's things like that. When I first had children, my children when they were young, I always thought loss of a child was like something I couldn't come back from. Like I thought it was some horrible thing, right? Like this, not, like it would break me, right? Like I just, something you never recover from, and the plan at that point was having an intergenerational family farm. And that I just thought, my kids were going to be sort of the centerpiece of my life for the rest of my life, had a difficult marriage I was going through, but, just having this idea of an intergenerational family and a support system and everybody supporting each other through difficult times, that was the goal. And it came up so short from that. Like it's kind of a joke now to think that I once thought that was possible. like, like it's so not that, right? But by the time my daughter committed suicide, my one of four children, it was bad and was a shock to hear about, but wasn't a total surprise because of just the kind of person she had turned into, right? But in that, three of my four children, the other, two of the other four children, two of the other three children that are still living, we're not in contact. We have no relationship. They don't have any desire to have any relationship with me. And, I don't care. Like, it doesn't bother me now. I mean, of course, back when I was younger, and that was unthinkable, right? But it's just, the way it's worked out. I don't know who they are now as people, who they were as kids. They've changed quite a bit when they were little, and they don't really know me at all. And so there's just that, right? I was just talking to my son, and he's got a job. Like, we've been trying to get him to, go out into the world, and he's, talking about moving out now sooner than, anticipated. And, it's at this point, it's going to be a relief. We don't have a bad relationship, but we're not close, and we're not similar. They have characteristics and qualities that are for me, biological, whatever it is, genetic. And they have things, but they're not, they don't have the same point of view. They don't have the same desire for a relationship with God. I mean, as far as I know. But we have very little in common and very little that we would talk about, right? There are some things with my son now, he's a little bit different. But, we're just not close. It's not a close family. I wasn't close with my brothers and sisters. I spent some time living with my brother after I moved out of my parents' house. I was in college, and, I had a relationship with him and his kids, my nephews. But, we've all gone in different directions. And, I don't have any hostile feelings to my three sisters and my brother. My parents are dead. but we're not close, and we don't really, we're people that could spend short bits of time together, and there's some, natural love there that's there between family members, but it only lasts it only lasts about 10 or 15 minutes, and then it's like I got to get up out of here, right, kind of thing. And so that's just the way it goes. Like, it's just, there's things like that, right? But what I'm saying about this is you can be grateful for anything. Like some of these things that I've gone through, with my first marriage, and just, before that, and, periods of my life, and, bad decisions my parents made that hurt me, and, all these things that you can be a victim about, or say how life is unfair, and, painful things to go through. I mean, there's physical pain, which is many times better than emotional pain and heartbreak and things. But, these things that seem like impossible to endure, they can often benefit you in this idea of miseries as divine blessings if you look at them at the right way. If you see that there is some plan here, then you take the attitude that I'm going through this for a reason. And you can probably figure out what that reason, and even if it's something that you did in a past life or something that's there, and that there is some kind of benefit for going through these unthinkable things, these horrible things. I mean, if you take the right attitude, and many people who have gone through horrible things, at some point they get to a place where they, the 5 stages of grief, where they accept it and even are grateful for it and see that it has benefited them in some way. And if they could attune to their spiritual journey and their soul's path, they realize they've benefited quite a bit, right? Because, as much as we think these things are, like our life is, all is everything, our physical body is everything, and who we are is, our human selves is all there is, because that's all we can see, or that's, all that we know, or we don't put any effort into the larger scale of things, the bigger picture. But, there are things that happen where loss of a child, trauma, abuse, that make people more spiritual, make them psychic, make them attuned to a different. I mean, sometimes like a mother will lose a child and she'll so desperately want to connect with the child, she'll penetrate to the spiritual world. Like she'll figure out a way, or even, parents, fathers, loved ones, they'll penetrate to a level where they'll be able to interact on a spiritual level. They'll change their consciousness. They'll shift it to another level because they so desperately want to make contact with somebody. They'll start praying. They'll become, less concerned about their petty little materialistic, desires and problems and things like this that seem petty and in retrospect after something horrible happens, right? And so all these things that you go through, there's a way to take them. And especially when all of us might be going through something like this collectively as our country like implodes, and all the other things happen, wars and other things, tragedies, and that, not looking at it like God's punishing you, or not looking at it like God sucks, or not looking at it like there is no God, and feeling like a victim. Because when you feel like a victim, then all work stops. And looking for some, reconciliation. I mean, there's always some time it takes to just accept something and go through it. And there's the shock, and there's real trauma and shit that you have to deal with. But once you're able to, go through those periods of misery and, suffering, you just are naturally a part of it. The being able to see the bigger picture, that this isn't, all there is, that this physical body is an illusion, and that what you really are is a soul, and there's a reason for everything that happens, and it benefits you in ways that you can't conceive of unless you really put some effort into it. Okay, so let me wrap this one up here. Okay, greetings, brothers and sisters. So this is going to be, I think, an important audio. It's like, based on what I'm going to say, nothing's important, right? But like in terms of understanding the aspect of toiling. So this is going to be the first audio, I think, in the 192nd edition of the Journey series. Yeah, it'll be the introduction to it. It'll be also an introduction to the video I'm making today on Monday, April 28th, 2025, the day before the gathering starts here, the Babuji Gathering. And it'll be a part of a 3-part audio or 4-part audio on the Gratefullness Meditation channel. And so one thing that I realized when my family and I, we started a homestead, and my kids were learning to milk cows and do all kinds of farming things. There was progression. We were building things, learning how to homestead. In the beginning, it was very positive, and then it just went south. And there was issues. My ex had psychological issues. She was a abuse victim at her parents, at the hands of her parents in various ways, and she never dealt with that properly. Like you can deal with those things whatever way you deal. But certainly with the Sahaj Marg system, there's ways to deal with it, but she didn't. And there was an outcome to it, right? A negative outcome. And there's a time where we were just toiling, and every time we tried to get our head above water. There's a show called Homestead Rescue, and I don't really like the show, but it's all these shows are kind of like, fake to whatever degree. It's on Discovery Channel. But like what they deal with on Homestead Rescue is what every homesteader deals with, like in terms of, you have a system out there, a monetary system, a social system, a cultural system, and that is pulling you into it. And when people used to live in a farming, homesteading, tribal, village-based system, that was the system. Like that was what you had to adapt to. That was the system everybody had globally. And it was different, different parts of the globe. There were different cultural aspects, different religious aspects, different climates, different traditions, these things. But it's what everybody had, like in some way or another. It was similar in that it was, it was the same level of lifestyle. You had to, obtain food. You had to, make your clothing. You had to, build houses, like things like this. You had to have these skills. There was no monetary system. The monetary system at some point came in various places, but no big cities and things like this for the most part. Until there were. Until then, we have now something different, right? And it's hard to go outside the system for whatever reason. It's like the nature fights back against it because you're trying to do something that everyone else is not doing. People living off the land, living, off grid, these things. And at some point, you're just toiling, and you don't have enough money to do whatever because you need money, and that's not what you're doing. You're working, to try to be self-sufficient, and like people run out of money, which is one of the big things. But they don't have enough skill level, and then nature's, it's like nature's just out to get you and things like this. Like you're just fighting nature, and you toil. Like it's this thing where you just think you're about to turn the corner, and the door sort of opens up for you, and then it's slammed in your face, and you're just toiling, right? Toiling is where you're working to do something that you have no chance to achieve, right? There's that, when RFK Jr., which we'll go back to him, he was talking about this when he ran for president. This guy, I think his name is Vesuvius. It's the guy who pushes the boulder up, this giant boulder up a hill every day and doesn't reach the top of the hill, and waking up and doing it the next day, like it's for all eternity, right? It's just this, this idea, this, whatever, this almost like, I want to say a God because, like just failure. And, using that as a way to describe his presidential campaign, which is true. Just doing it to do it, like just doing it to fail, because it's the right thing to do, like this idea. But failure comes with very strong impressions. Like failure really stings. Like toiling really stings. In terms of like, if you toil now, you're going to toil next life. If you toil that life, you're going to toil. Like if you commit suicide this life, you're going to tend to commit suicide in your next life. Like it's patterns of behavior, trying to break these cycles. And toiling is one of them. And so the lack of success is, a part of the human condition, not just for one person, but for many other people. And there's no more, bigger lack of success or pattern of behavior in terms of toiling, then spiritual failure. This failure of spiritual movements to raise people up to a higher level. It's the biggest problem with the human race. That there'll be a higher developed soul coming. We have the Pope dying, the Pope's funeral, which was, this past, whatever, a couple days ago or whatever. And, what the fucking Catholic Church has become. And there's no more indication of toiling than that, right? So Jesus' life and what Jesus was and what Jesus suffered and what Jesus, success and failure is not accurately portrayed by the church. And there's stories that they've lifted from other, there's stuff to do with Horus and some of these other things. These other, traditions, whatever it is. They compare, the similar stories that have been lifted from other religious movements, spiritual movements. But in terms of Jesus' life, he started off whatever way he started off, right? The divine conception thing is not real. That didn't happen. And, he was, basically a bastard child, with a single mom. And he had, in his spiritual essence, his soul, his past existences, his, whatever, subtle bodies, a tendency towards spirituality. He traveled to India. There's his lost years that they don't want to talk about. He took some, spiritual training from, some yogi there, came back to his homeland in Israel. And he could see that the religion was flawed, that the religion was not connecting people to God. Like he understood the eternal connection to God, right? And so he started to tell people about this. And some of them it appealed to, and he had a following, right? But with every spiritual tradition, especially when you're coming from the East Indian type culture, the Eastern cultures that are more, it's more embedded in their history, in their culture, and their even genetically, to a very materialistic, warlike people, white people in Europe and, these other countries that, there's a different orientation to life. It never really catches. It never really sticks. Like it's hard for people to understand or to get, right? Because you're raised in a certain way and you're programmed in a certain way. And this is passed on for generations and it's in your genetics, it's in your, whatever it might be. And so, that's why you see a lot of this new age stuff that happens, that they take ancient stuff, ancient traditions, some of them good, some of them bad, and they materialize them, they monetize them into some other, watered down version of something that probably, was supposed to die out years ago. Like that's what happens with all these new age things. They take things that were, maybe good for the time or the period or the people, some kind of, spiritual practice or whatever it is. And then they dumb it down so they can make money off of it, and they make it about how you can receive material happiness if you do this practice, because these practices are real spiritual practices, have nothing to do with materiality at all. True spiritual practice is just about you connecting to the divinity within you. It's going to affect your life. You're going to do your job better. You're going to be a better husband or wife, if you do the things correctly. You're going to be more selfless. You're going to develop compassion and empathy. Like things will happen that are good for your material existence, at least in terms of making you a better person. But it isn't going to make your problems go away. It isn't going to make the things that you're suffering from that drive you to therapy or drive you to some new age thing. It's not going to help you. It might help you sleep and do some of these other things you're struggling with, but for the most part, it's not going to make you rich and famous, and it's not going to satisfy your ego, certainly. And that's what Jesus was dealing with. So he, told these people things, and they liked what he was saying, and they, they were digging what he was saying. Some of them, majority of people probably dismissed him, and like it represents you changing, so that's a hard sell in general. But like he did his thing, and after a while, he started to get some people that followed him, and what happens to every person that does this, they start feeling themselves a little bit. Like they start forgetting about God, and then they think about their people, and then they get into serving the people. They become more about, the original approach to doing anything like a spiritual, when you come down with a spiritual mandate, like you're supposed to, like whatever Jesus was doing was his destiny, right? And there's, your soul is incarnating to do something like that, to help people learn about God, right? To develop spiritual tendencies. And so what always happens is the person forgets their primary reason, which is to serve God, and they start serving the people. They think they're there to serve the people, and the people go south, like they always do. Like they dig it for a little bit, but then when they realize how tough it is to be a spiritual person, they realize that the commitment is, and they can't get rid of their spiritual, their material flaws and addictions and things. And they're like, well, this is too hard. Or they like the teachings, but they can't implement them into their lives. And they still make the same mistakes, and even maybe more so. The mistakes get enhanced by the power of that's being given through this person, this divine person. And like in Jesus's case, like so many cases, you start getting depressed. You start instead of just doing God's work, whatever the results, do the work and leave the results to God, which is one of the best teachings in the Sahaj Marg system. You don't think about the results. You don't think about what's happening with people. It's what saved me, in terms of anything that I do here. Because, the people will always tend towards the lower. Even the spiritual person themselves, the saint, everyone has these human flaws, right? And so, you do the work, and then there's no sense of results, right? You don't think about the results. You don't think about any outcomes. You don't dream or imagine anything. You don't, even for the people themselves. Like people have a higher nature and a lower nature, and they'll flirt with their higher nature, but ultimately, mostly return to their lower nature. And so, if you really read between the lines in Jesus' story, the people started to disappoint him, which, like inevitably happens. And, living in the kind of place he was, the level of consciousness that was there at that time there in history, the people just didn't have it in them, right? They didn't have the ability to embrace his higher teachings, and he started to get depressed. It's a bummer. And then this idea of failure and all these things, and then you blame yourself, and you can't do it no matter what you try to do, no matter what you say, whatever you try to do. People just don't want to rise up to it. And there's jealousy and drama and infighting. And then the saint just was praying to God to take him away. Like they just pray to die. Like I just, it's too much pain to bear. It's overwhelming. They wake up depressed because they're toiling, right? It's fucking, you're fighting a losing battle. And so they're toiling, and and I mean, there's indications of they've left in some of the things like Jesus saying, Father, why hast thou forsaken me? He's lost his faith, right? In that moment when he said that, he's lost his faith. And so then all the things that happened afterwards, the crucifixion, all these things came out of that, right? And then all of he had 3, out of 12 disciples, 3 completely, had their issues. Certainly Judas being the worst of them, doubting Thomas, and Peter denying him. Peter becomes the head of his church. And then the thing just is no longer as good as it was once Jesus dies. And then ends up in fucking weird-ass Pope land with inverted crosses and all the shit that I just showed you in my last video, right? All that weird shit that was where I covered the Pope's funeral. For those of you listening this not on my regular channel or my regular video, you can find that video, whatever. These weird guys wearing these pointy hats and the fucking inverted crosses and weird shit and pedophilia and all this stuff that happens with these religious organizations, right? So it starts off with a, divine mandate, a divine movement, and a higher developed soul like Jesus comes in to bless some group of people with some spiritual teachings. And it ends up where you see all these religions are now, in complete utter failure materially, powerful organizations that are political, filled with sin. They're filled with anything but connecting to God, and they're all about what the opposite of what they started out to be. They become completely inverted, and then they're really blocking people's connection from God. They're like almost devil worshiping in that sense, and taking advantage of people's inner desire to connect to God, but in a way that they're never going to get connected to God, right? Like it, piques their interest with some teachings, some legitimate teachings and some other things, but then it just descends into some corrupt, religious power, powerful, religion, the power of religion, in a way that is, demonic and devil worshiping in the sense that it's inverted, and it actually hurts people's ability to connect to God and to divinity within them. This is going to go somewhere sort of positive. I just want to say this is not going to have, I wouldn't call it a happy ending, but I'll get into the positive aspect of it, right? This idea of lascivious and toiling. And so within the Trump administration, like this is a good example of this. So I'm going to cover in the video I make today, my normal video, it'll be cover Tulsi Gabbard, who is just selling herself out for some stupid ass stuff that's happening with Pete Hegseth and just lying and someone who's whatever. You'll see it when I cover it here. People can go find the video if they're watching it somewhere else. If they're interested in seeing it, it'll be on my regular channel. It's a video that'll be up probably on the 30th of Babuji's birthday, I guess, because I'm 2 days ahead of videos. So like I have a video that I have two videos waiting to go up. One this morning, it'll go up at 9, and then another one that'll go up tomorrow, and then so one on the 30th. So this, I guess, is appropriate because it's the second master of the Sahaj Marg system, sort of the I don't want to say the most important one, but there's just the breakthroughs that were done during his lifetime, and this coincides with that, his birthday. So Tulsi Gabbard just sells herself out. But I woke up and I was thinking about all these things when I was meditating. I'm doing this kind of thoughtlessness, and these ideas just sort of flowed through me. And when you look at Trump's administration, it's filled with very desperate people. Like there's the number one quality that all these people have, including Trump, is that there's a desperation in them. And the two biggest examples are Pete Hegseth and RFK Jr. Now, RFK Jr. is a much more developed person, right? But both these guys are addicts. Pete Hegseth was, an alcoholic and a womanizer. And RFK Jr. was a former heroin addict, right? It was even worse, and also a womanizer. Other than like some guru disciple, your relationship with God, your single most intimate and loving relationship is with that of your spouse, your significant other, right? You're closer to that person. There's one person that you really need to have the other person's back. You need to be there for. It's your spouse, especially in the way that our cultural system is now, because we don't have like anything else. We don't have good relationships with our parents and siblings, and I mean most of us, right? And so, in terms of people who will, be there for you, it comes down to your spouse. Like everything, like this is just, it should be more than that. We should have a village and whatever, a community of people that are just there sacrificing for each other. But we're also trained to be very selfish, to be all about ourselves. So, we have one relationship where, and then with your kids as well as an extension of that. But you're supposed to be there for your spouse and your kids, right? And to be there for your kids, you have to be there for your spouse, because there's, the family has been decimated. And so if you don't have a good marriage, so the kids are getting next to nothing and want next to nothing because they're already not into their parents. They're being raised by video games and then, whatever's going on around them. And then when you have a shitty marriage on top of it, what little you would get as a family is now, the way the kids have to go through divorces and these things, right? And all the ways that our system sucks. So, you have this one person that you have to be there for. And so if you cheat on that one person, then who won't you cheat on? Like that's what you are. Like you're not trustworthy to anybody, right? Because you're not only cheating on your spouse, but you're cheating on your kids, and all these things, right? Not just cheating, like, could be a number of, ways that you just aren't there for the other person in the relationship. And, it's kind of set up that way because you're told to be selfish and these things. So that's why, people are alone, right? But then there are people who take it to another fucking level. Like they're just, like, there could be affairs or, a one-off, like something like that, which is bad, but not as bad as what Pete Hegseth did. And what Pete Hegseth did was he, married 3 different women, 2 women, and had multiple kids. And why he was married to his second wife, he impregnated his producer while showing up drunk to work at Fox News, and then went out and had a sexual encounter with a woman at a hotel that she said was abusive, which was assault. So he's cheating on not only his wife, but his baby mama, girlfriend, with another woman who says that it's sexual assault, right? And that was what this guy was presented as, a person with almost no experience to do a job that he was ill-equipped to do. And he said that all that shit, when his mom wrote this letter about what a piece of shit he was, right? She wrote this letter to him and sent it to his ex-wife, because, like, he was a piece of shit, right? And so, he's a fucked up person with addictive problems, right? And then you had RFK Jr., who was a former heroin addict, which is pretty bad. And then, he had affairs on one of his wife, 32 of them, extramarital affairs. And he documented them in a diary, which his ex-wife found when then she committed suicide, right? And there's a desperation in the Kennedy family. Now, if you listen to RFK Jr., he's well developed, much more mature, much more, there's much more inside of him than there is with Pete Hegseth, who's just a lightweight, the person that Trump would usually call a lightweight, certainly if he was a Biden person. That's how Trump would view him. But, if you're a Trumper, it doesn't matter because anything that, as long as you love Trump, he wipes that away because Trump has his own desperation, right? Trump, 3 wives, cheating on him with like prostitutes and porn stars and really seedy shit, just a weird relationship with these girls and the beauty contest that he bought for, to access like a Harvey Weinstein kind of thing. Just a gross, fat, weird, just hedonistic, low-life piece of shit Trump is, right? And so, of course, he's going to have these people because he has these same tendencies. But RFK Jr., cheated on his wife, documented it, she read it, and then kills herself. With the Kennedy family, he was able to give good interviews and be an interesting person because they had these discourses and debates amongst the family members. And they were all well educated, went to, Ivy League schools. And they would, go on these family retreats and they would, have this discourse and debate each other. And they had to think about things and challenge each other. And, they grew up in one of these academic environments where success and achieving success and, working in the political field, amongst other things, they're a very successful family in terms of, high level, education, high level intellects, these things, right? What made him more appealing when you listen to him because he has, he's well versed. He's a lawyer. He's, learned to argue as a lawyer. He's learned to, appeal to people, win people over. But there's a fucked up thing in the Kennedy family, right? They're really self-destructive. Like when talk about family curses, there's the 2 brothers that we know about, RFK and JFK, who were assassinated. But they had an older brother named Joe who was flying some kind of, he's a fighter pilot. I think it must have been World War II. It was World War II. And, he was the chosen one. Like, he was to his dad, who was his, Joe Kennedy Sr., whoever his name was, the grandfather, who, rose out of poverty and was involved in a lot of seedy shit, right? A lot of criminal type things. And they became a wealthy family, right? So, like this hidden history. And then he wanted these guys to have a seat at the table, to be into politics, right? But his son Joe was a very successful fighter pilot, flying for the Air Force. And he was done. Like, he had flew all his missions. He was out of the Air Force, and now he's going to transition into politics. But they asked him to do one last flight. Now, I heard RFK Jr. talk about this, and I watched it when I was a kid in a movie called Joe the Forgotten Kennedy. It was like a made-for-TV movie. And so he has this device on the plane, which is some sort of a bomb. And, there was, during World War II, when they were first starting all these flights, the World War I, World War II, they had people they were trained as pilots, and, like, they were dropping like flies. There's so many of these people who became pilots were basically guinea pigs for these flying contraptions, and they couldn't, like, take off the aircraft carriers. I mean, they were dying all the time. Like, they just, it was a very low success rate. They were not even dying in war, like dying because the plane shit the bed, and, like, they, this kind of thing. But he's got this device on this bomb on the plane. He's flying it from, I think, America to Europe, whatever it is. Like, Kennedy tells the story. And somebody accidentally, it's a remote control device, does something that activates the bomb, and the bomb blows up over the ocean. And he dies, right? When he was just, he was already out of the military, and it was unnecessary operation. Like, there's things that, they make a big deal about, but we know that America won the war, and, like, it was unnecessary for him to be in that thing, doing that thing, some just stupidity. And then, of course, there was one tragedy after another. The assassinations of the Kennedys, his John Kennedy Jr. dying in a plane crash, all these things that happened. Ted Kennedy crashing his car off the bridge, killing his lover secretary, leaving her to drown and die because he wasn't supposed to be in the car with her. And these things, that scandal that kept Ted Kennedy from, who was really a deviant, you heard him talk, was just, these guys had their compulsions. They all had weird sexual addictions. RFK Jr., JFK was supposed to have a affair with Marilyn Monroe, but he also had, his friend was a gay, openly gay guy who they were best friends, and they spent quite a bit of time together. And they would wear the same bathing suits, like they would match their outfits, which, there's a lot to indicate that he was, this guy was his gay lover. And, things like this. They had a lot of stuff, a lot of self-destructive things, and they were just toiling, right? They had, breeding, and they had financial success, and they had political success, but they were all tragically flawed. And whatever they did to, have these situations, it's a family curse, and you can just see it. And the family turning on RFK, his sister, and these people writing an op-ed before the election, backing Joe Biden over their relative, these things, right? Just, just an icky whatever. And then, of course, the stuff, what I said with Pete Hegseth, who's, like, in a job that's way over his head. But Trump's people are all like this, right? They're all desperate. They're all, needing something, right? They're all, there's some void that's being filled by success, by so-called material success and positions of power and money and things like this. Trump, of course, being another person like this, with these tragic flaws that they, they're looking for something outside themselves to fill the void within. There are people who are just not, capable of living just a normal life and being satisfied with that. And, they need something external to be, they feel like they're worthless piece of shits that need some, some position of power, some, most of these people are like this, most celebrities, but Trump has a real collection of people like this, and that are Elon Musk, another one, right? So with all his weird kids that he has fathering, these various kids with 5, 6 different women, 20 kids, thinking that he's repopulating the world in some polygamous type of situation, and then just failing, ultimately failure. Ultimately, like, success in the beginning, but failure in the end, right? And ultimately, the biggest failure that all of us are experiencing is that we're toiling, keeping a doomed system alive, right? It's like, when you're in a doomed marriage, a doomed relationship, you're, whatever it is, like you have cancer or something, and the outcome is already predetermined. And of course, when you're fighting death, which is what we view our, everyone's trying to fight off death, right? Like to, beat death, some big goofy movie now about finding the fountain of youth. Like I just saw a trailer for that. This idea that you could live forever, like somehow death is not a positive thing. It's not a part of the, it's not inevitable. And so when you're fighting off death with some, idea that death is bad and life is good, and, our whole attitude towards these things, and that you're supposed to enjoy your life and, avoid thinking about death and, what death means and why there's death and, all these things. I've covered this substantially in my Gratefullness meditation channel about preparing for death, because it's a part of the end, right? It is the end, right? It's the end of the story. The story ends with you dying. The story of your life ends with you dying. So whatever you think you're accomplishing in terms of your life, if you don't have some part of it that's preparing for death, right? Like you have your, if you look at your life as being, a scripted, a set of events and works that you're supposed to do. You have a talent, a skill you're supposed to contribute to the, to the divine community of people, right? You have something that you're supposed to do for God that benefits humanity, right? Benefits your local village, your family, right? You have these things you can do, various things that you can contribute, like cooking food and, music maybe, whatever it is, like, things, skills as a farmer, like you just have some talents that the community benefits from, right? You're a healer, something, whatever. And, that's your life, like your life's work. But then, part of that is understanding the spiritual aspect of your life. Like you have your material things, you have your material successes, and then you have spirituality. You have a soul, and that you have this, this long game type of situation, which is, many lives, despite what these bullshit religions try to teach you. You have many lives, and you have many, not just in terms of a physical body here, but etheric, existence. You have some, larger, long-term, the long game type of spiritual goals, right? You have your, whatever your soul's doing spiritually, whatever you're getting out of this life, your material life on a soul level, whatever reason your soul has you, has to incarnate here in a human form. And so you have to get, some understanding of that as well, right? And weave that into your material successes and your, your material discharge of your duties that you're supposed to do as your life unfolds and you're doing these things. But you're doing them also, you're doing them for the people in your life, but you're really doing them for God, right? Which is because you're ordained by God to do this service and produce this work and these things, discharge of your duties. And then you are also, in all that, you are doing it for your souls, whatever you're supposed to get out of this as a soul, as a spiritual essence. But what we've become as a people is 100% focused on the material, with no sense of a soul. Really, people think they have a soul, whatever they, think about these things. It crosses their mind, but really doesn't. Doesn't. There's nothing there, right? Something just passes you by. It's like a job that you could have gotten, or a person you could have married, right? and then you like see that person years later. You see, somebody who had the job you could have gotten, and whatever, like some opportunity that you just didn't, you didn't take advantage of, or it just didn't work out. Like that's most people's relationship with their soul. Like it's there, they have an idea of it, like there could have been something, but it just passed them by, right? So that's the majority of people, and then you have it just being your material success. Then it's about the job you have, the money you have, how happy you are. Like you have all these people posting shit on Facebook and showing you how great their lives are. Posers, like you have a society of posers, right? Like, I mean, Trump administration's a good example of this. I mean, they all are. The Biden administration as well, but there are different kinds of posers. People who are desperate inside and then, walking with a swagger and they're proud or whatever they are, right? They're, this thing that show you, look how great I am. Look at the money I have, like Elon Musk, right? Like, does that guy look like he's getting it done, right? This weird fuck, all these people. But he's, was considered the richest man in the world for a while or whatever, so, he's one of the richest people. And so, I mean, you see these people, they're miserable. They're not whole, they're not functional. And so, in all this, particularly in our society, when you discount half of your existence, which is the spiritual side, and you're not dealing with the inevitability of your own death, which is the ending to everybody's story, then there becomes these things that are just toiling. They seem like they're important, but they're not. People get entrenched in these types of things, right? And it's centered around the no, the idea of being selfish. Doing things for oneself instead of working for a greater good, right? Participating, sacrificing your own needs for the betterment of certainly for God and God's work, and then the betterment of the world, right? Sacrificing your own whatever it might be, your own desires and your own things that you want to do, your own selfish the things that are that would satisfy you in a sense or whatever it might be for the greater good, like doing your duty in a sense. And this is when the Kali Yuga came in, the at the end of the Mahabharata, this was the end of Dharma. Dharma means duty, where people used to do things out of a sense of duty, a sense of self-sacrifice. And that age ended, and it became about like, what's in it for me, right? What have you done for me lately? This kind of thing. Everything about selfish pursuit, a selfish orientation, me, I, individualism, egoism, and so this is the outcome. And at the end of that, it's very hollow. It's pleasure based and superficial. It's all the negative things. Like it just all the things that go with selfishness and egoism. If you look at like the animal population, they do their job, whatever it is. Like they can deviate from. Like I saw this documentary where hummingbirds were learning to drill into the side of the flower to get the nectar rather than to go through the opening of the flower. And so what they were supposed to be doing is pollinate these insects, bees and, hummingbirds, these creatures that pollinate something, right? Where they take the pollen, cross-pollination. They take the pollen from one plant and put it in another, through the, they have some on their face or whatever it is, right? Their feet, like this is how these flowers exist. This is why the flowers are pretty and give off a nice odor, a nice scent, so that creatures will come and distribute the pollen, and then they'll produce these seeds, and they will have more flowers, more more of this potential food for the pollinator. But when hummingbirds start doing this, they're killing their own food source by circumventing what they're supposed to do. And that's what people have done, right? People have a responsibility and a duty to the greater good. And you see what these politicians talk about all the time. It's about selfish shit. It's about, you being selfish and taking care of your selfish needs and these things, right? Me, I, right? This stuff. And so the time of egoism. And that leaves people empty and hollow. participating and doing things for other people and sacrificing and, for the greater good makes people feel good. It's, it's not just makes them feel good. It's something that's, on a deeper level of, it's a higher level thing, right? It's a, there's a, it's transcendent in some way, right? We're not trained to do that, right? That's not, we're trained to do the opposite. So there's a lot going against us. But it's not just now, like it's in previous yugas and different time. Like it's a tendency of our species, right? So if you think about all the things that human beings have with technological advancement, like, there's lots of critters, mice and insects, and, inevitably, if we weren't here, all kinds of creatures that would live in our houses, right? Because, our houses are kind of great, like our buildings. There's shelter and the climate and things or whatever. I mean, people pay all kinds of money for pest control or whatever to keep animals from termites, whatever it might be, from wrecking your house, for invading your house, right? But you think of all the different things that we have in terms of technology, and then you think about how we use those things, right? In terms of indulgence and, oftentimes some deviant type of thing. Like we have the internet, we have computers, which is, I mean, think about the amount of information and knowledge we're able to exchange, the information that's out there, the things that people have done in terms of studying the natural world. People know so much about plants and trees and animals and environment and water and, all of the ocean and all the things that